Hi, this is Paul. This is the other Paul. And we got
Hi,
two
this is
Pauls
Paul.
here. We
I've
we
always
are
wanted to say that.
Paul and I haven't spoken for a long time, and it was
Yeah,
just a matter of calendars and schedules. Paul, both of us are work full time in churches, and both of us have significant projects. Is it outside of church? Is it on top of church? Is it alongside of church? Is it interwoven with church? That's sort of kind of the way it
yeah.
is for pastors because uh, pastors' boundaries, unlike, let's say, a therapist who has somebody in a box, pastors' boundaries are very, I mean, people will call me. I have a lot of people in church that they know, if they know it's a holiday or a day off, but they will call anyway. And, you know, Unfortunately, now with texting, if it's a real emergency, they'll text, and then it's like, oh, okay, well, I'll.
Right.
That,
And then you're
that,
like,
that,
how did you get my number?
no, everybody has my number.
Yeah. Yeah.
You'd be surprised who has my number. My number's not hard. I shouldn't say that. All right, I'm gonna stop causing problems for myself.
Yes.
Um, let's see. This will probably go up on both of our channels. I think probably most of the people on both of our channels know both of us.
Yeah.
Paul, well, let's start. Paul was just actually bringing me up to speed. Just give me a little short, for people who watch mostly my channel, just give me a little short update on what you're doing because I know that a lot of people who follow my channel also follow your channel.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
you've got the meta modern stuff, you've got the superhero stuff, you've got a book deal that you're working on your Substack, you got a bunch of stuff going on.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. It's good chatting, man. I just so appreciate it's been a while since we've talked, but I still feel this a deep sense of connection to you. I think we started these kind of like YouTube podcast ventures relatively at the same time.
Yep.
At least that's my recollection of it. It's going on a little over 7 years for me, and I
Yep.
would say that seems about. I know you were probably doing the Freddie and Paul show maybe before that, which
Yeah,
is
the Freddie and Paul show
which is just
predates.
awesome. I mean, that might be one of my favorite facets of your channel because it does capture so beautifully. It captures so beautifully what life is like in a local church with real human beings,
Yep.
and it's the best.
Yep.
It really is. So that is a part of my life too, as well as you mentioned. Like I do have a portion of my life that's given to our local church community. Usually when I'm doing the podcast stuff and the forward facing stuff, I don't talk a lot about that, and it's for a couple of reasons. One is because just as a congregational or governed church, I see myself as this is different than kind of like the non-denom world I grew up in, where a lot of the language around non-denom world and charismatic world was that's pastor so and so's church, as if you were like the CEO or this was the business or the startup that you had. And it's just not our mentality at all. It's like I'm a servant of our church. Our congregation voted for me. You know, I'm appointed just by our church. I'm not even like I'm licensed. I can do funerals and things like that in the state of Minnesota, but I'm not ordained in our denomination either. But the other side of that too is like because I spent so much time in education as well, I ended up seeing the podcast as kind of I really was seeing it as a moving out of the classroom or a new classroom space opportunity. So the last few years, we've been having these chats for a while with a lot of overlapping interests. I think over the last few years, I found myself maybe zeroing in on just like theology and culture, the intersection of culture and theology, kind of tracing cultural trends, the importance of narrative in our own narrative formation, in our own spiritual formation. Interested, as we were talking a little bit before we pressed record, interested in the ways in which like television, movies, etc., function as dare I even say alternative sacred texts, or at the very least, alternative modern myths, akin to what the Greeks had with the stories of Hercules and the Greek gods, that stuff hasn't gone away. So that's been an area that I've kind of mainly tried to zero in, which is hard. I think we have a similar temperament. We've got history backgrounds. My graduate studies in seminary, I wasn't an MDiv guy. I was a Christian thought guy. And that phrase has very little meaning for a lot of people, but if you've kind of been in evangelical spaces, you kind of know that it's not the MDiv guys, it's not the biblical scholar guys, it's not the systematic theologians. It's kind of the weird space where like a Francis Schaeffer, or to some degree like a Bill Craig, have kind of occupied those spaces. So that gives you a lot of diverse interests, which can
Yeah.
be hard to hone in and find maybe a thread or two that to really specialize in. So the last couple of years, I just have found that I did do a book a few years ago, like on the problem of evil, which was really, I think it was helpful primarily for my podcast listening audience. But in the last few years, I think the thing that I found the most fruit in is helping people think about culture through a religious lens. So I do some writing over in our Substack about that. The podcast has tilted more in that focus of kind of like the overlap of culture, religion, and behavioral cognitive science stuff. So some familiar voices like Vervaeke, Clay Rutledge, who's a colleague of mine now. I did just jump on as a, religion and culture fellow for the Human Flourishing Lab, where Clay Rutledge is the executive director. And as you mentioned, I am working on a book right now with Nelson Books, HarperCollins, Nelson Books, which the funny thing about this, Paul, and I want to hear plenty more from you too. I feel like I'm talking a bit much here, but the funny thing about these last 7 years is there's been there's a wide range of very, very heavy, deep subjects that you have covered, that you've brought on numerous people to have. I mean, we're talking about like the collapse of Western civilization and all of these things that are of huge import. And the funniest thing I found, and God uses the foolish things to confound the wise. I think some of the biggest traction I started to get, I've relatively talked about the same things for the last 7 years, but noticed a switch when I was able to kind of pinpoint some things that were happening in culture and make some prognostications about where it was going. One of which, this is the most funny part to me, one of which was a successful prognostication about the band Creed,
That's right.
the what often people called the butt rock, you know, post grunge band of the late 90s. And I started to notice these really fascinating trends. I'm not on TikTok. I'm on like millennial TikTok, which would be Instagram. And so you're getting like the TikTok reels like 2 or 3 weeks late for all the middle-aged mom and dads out there. And I started noticing like these repurposed TikTok videos from young people who were expressing what I would call post-ironic sincerity about the band Creed. Now, Creed was, again, they were kind of post that Seattle grunge wave in the 90s, in this liminal space in the 90s where we had what I'm kind of talking about in the forthcoming book as like an overlapping of stories. So in the 90s in pop culture, you had the slow death of what we could call the modern story, which is essentially another way of talking about modernism, and the emphasis in the modern story on meritocracy and like a shared universal moral framework, and religion is kind of like a private thing that you keep in a box, and it's an inconvenience, but we're not necessarily against religion. We're not tearing down religious institutions. It's just like, let's keep it in its own little private separate box. To And this was really my generation, formative years of my generation, the rise in pop culture. This had been going around in high culture for a while. The rise in pop culture in what I've called like the postmodern anti-story. So in the 90s, you kind of have these like overlapping stories. And one of the key pivot points that you could look at was like the year 1999, where you have Fight Club, you have The Matrix, and then you also have Woodstock 99. Woodstock 99 ended in literal fire and brimstone. Um, very different spirit to it than the original Woodstock. Um, I think the anthem of Woodstock 99 was the song Break Stuff by Limp Bizkit. If your listeners aren't familiar with Limp Bizkit, yes, that is a real band. And Break Stuff was kind of becoming the anthem of my like Rage Against the Machine generation, right? So this is a long way of saying in the middle of that was this weird band Creed that was uber sincere,
Hmm.
had a lot of religiously, themed lyrics, and they had a spike in popularity, were dominating the billboards with their first record. And then by the time you get to like 2001, as these stories are kind of like the modern story is dying, the anti-story, postmodern anti-story is rising. 2001, right after September 11th, which is a crucial hinge point in these stories too, I believe. They have their infamous Dallas Cowboys Thanksgiving Day halftime show. And if you're too young to remember that halftime show, you need to go watch it on YouTube. This was supposed to be, kind of like the doors of this new generation. And here they are at the halftime show. They're wearing Dallas Cowboys jerseys. They have like Cirque du Soleil, like people flying down from the banners on these like streaming, I don't know what you call them, long pieces of fabric. There are dancers. They bring in a gospel choir.
This is
It is this
Creed doing
intense.
this.
This is Creed doing this at the
The
Thanksgiving
Dallas.
Day Dallas
Wow.
halftime show. And it was like from that point on, I think that was a real pivot. That was like the last gasp breath of the modern story, which has all of these deep connections to like American exceptionalism. From that point on, they became corporate butt rock. They became the butt end of jokes for the next really 2 decades. And all of this in the early days of meme culture, as meme culture was beginning in the late aughts into the teens, right? Creed jokes were everywhere, so that postmodern anti-story was rising. And so those values, that sincerity, that
Yeah.
even like, religious inclination, the kind of America sentiment, that stuff had fallen way out of fashion. And with it, Creed as well. So you had all these Creed memes. Well, I started to notice this would have been maybe circa early 20, I'm sorry, 2022, circa 2022, circa 2023, that there were these Gen Z kids that had never been a part of the original listening audience of that band, posting what I would call, it was still like a wink wink irony, but there was a sincerity in their expression of loving these Creed songs. It started with the song Higher, which is just uber sincere. And I started noticing this stuff. And by 2023, September of 2023, I made this prediction as I was doing my series on metamodernism, because this to me very much was in keeping with the meta-modern shift. We're looking after our exhaustion with sincerity and cynicism. We're looking for a way to find meaning again, but we still have to go through the doorway of irony, right? We can't delete postmodernism. It's still part of our native tongue and vocabulary. And so, using that vocabulary, can we still reach at saying something sincere? And
Hmm.
so I said, hey, I want to make a prediction here. In the next year, there's going to be a major resurgence of the band Creed. Well, by October, there were news headlines from the Texas Rangers. Texas Rangers blasting Creed in their clubhouse, I should say, to motivate them before games. The Texas Rangers go on to win the World Series that year. And they, during their like seventh inning stretches, it was either during the seventh inning stretch or some other point in their playoff run, all of their home games, they were blasting Creed's Higher, their song Higher, throughout the whole stadium, right? Creed ends up doing interviews on, ESPN now. And this is blowing up across culture. This is so wild to me, Paul, because this is just, again, foolish things to confound the wise. I feel like I've talked about things way more significant than the band Creed. But this started to garner some people's attention because by 2024, Creed had their highest grossing year as a band. They were the headliners of Woodstock 99. They were topping the charts in the late 90s and early aughts. 2024 was their highest grossing year as a band. And last time I checked, this would have been early still in 2025. Their song, what's One Last Breath, was still it was number one on the rock charts on Spotify. A strange occurrence, a totally strange occurrence. So, foolish things to confound the wise. I think people started seeing that and going, there might be something to this strange stuff this guy has been talking about for years, and that certainly opened up some more doors um, for people to, I think, have an interest in this sort of stuff. I've talked for a while, and I see inquisitive looks, so I would like to pause to allow you to jump in the conversation here too, Paul.
Well, this is fascinating. I've seen you write about this, but I'm an older dude, so
Yeah,
I stopped listening to popular music probably when I finished college in the mid
yeah,
80s. And so I don't know anything about the band Creed. I
for
mean,
sure.
I didn't know any of the waves of this, but it does track with me. It does track with me when so for example, we just had Midwestuary and
Hmm.
um, we there were basically two churches that hosted us. The church where we had the conference itself was the Elmhurst CRC. And that is a phenomenal facility. It's a large church. They, they've got the stage. If you walk into that church, I was funny, I was telling some of the people because the senior pastor there was on staff at the church plant in Roseville, Rockland, Lincoln, where we are. So I knew Greg from then. And but if you look at that building in Lincoln, and if you look at the church in Elmhurst, and if you've ever been to Bill Hybels' church, I
Hmm.
just said it, Willow Creek, with the big glass
Yep.
wall and the big
Yep.
stage. I mean, they're just sort of scaled versions of that church. And all of those churches were sort of started in that seeker wave.
Hmm.
That they've sort of gone from that. Granite Springs now has every week communion, more intentional liturgy, but they're still sort of a medium-sized church blend of some seeker sensibilities and let's say the new neo-sacramental liturgical wave that's
Mm.
going through. But the other church, so then we had the conference Friday, Saturday, and so Sunday they wanted me to have a church to preach in for whatever reason. Didn't happen at Elmhurst, but the church 2 blocks away, which is another Christian Reformed church, with everybody's like, why would there be two Christian Reformed churches 2 blocks from each other? And anybody who's in the Christian Reformed church knows that's really, really common. You go into a town, if there's
Mhm.
multiple Christian Reformed churches, they're often almost next door to each other because that's sort of, oh, it's all kinds of weird stuff. Anyway, so then Faith CRC was the church that I preached in it. I did a question and answer. I just posted those on my channel. And what was interesting is that liturgically, that church was it's an older church. And
Hmm.
they sang songs that were sort of they had some, let's say, classic Protestant hymns. They had a little bit of, let's
Hmm.
say, 1980s praise, and they had a violinist who was playing some songs, and it was like Twyla Paris. I mean, you'd have to be old
Yeah.
like me to know who Twyla Paris is. And
He is exalted.
that there you go. He is exalt. I mean, all
Mhm.
these. I mean,
Yeah.
I listened to those Twyla Paris songs when I was in college, in
Yeah.
Christian college, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
But it was really interesting because I thought that the element of the TLC that followed me into church that Sunday morning, they probably were happier in that church, which to, let's say, certain number of evangelicals that have long histories and sort of have looked at the sedimentary levels of all the worship wars and evolutions, would look at that church and say, this church they are not up to speed. And they are either not
Mhm.
up to speed in terms of, going full liturgy,
Right.
Anglican, Orthodox, and they're not up to speed in
Mhm.
terms of big box, non-denom,
Yeah.
evangelical.
Yep.
They are right in the middle, which is a place
Mhm.
that a lot of church consultants would say, you want to be here or you want to be here. You do
Yes.
not want to be in the middle.
And you're saying
But
the TLC crew preferred that one.
Well, I'm sure plenty of them
That was
wouldn't have
with you.
minded something more
Okay,
liturgical, but I think actually a
for
lot
sure.
of them they would much rather be in that middle than especially down sort of at Big Sound megachurch land.
Right.
And I mean, if there was a skinny jeans rock guitarist up there, that would have really sent shivers down some of their spine. But that is about exactly what you're pointing to with in
Hmm.
terms of the sedimentary layers. That's where Creed's at because
Right. So
it's yeah. Go ahead.
can I ask you a question? How you would describe that worship experience? Would you say that that church, even just in kind of being in this mushy middle, that it felt wholesome,
Yes, that's
like they weren't
exactly the
trying to be?
word.
So that's what people are looking for.
That's right.
It's
And when
it's wholesome.
That's right. And when I don't know if you had a conversation with Jordan Hall since his conversion
I,
yet or not.
yeah. I
Okay.
have.
So, oh, that's right. I think I listened to it. So, when he goes into this church in North Carolina in this community, that's exactly the word he uses. And
Hmm.
and I think that's exactly what you see in a church like that because they're they're innocent enough to not be self-conscious about the fact that they're either not doing nosebleed high
Yep.
church liturgy or not, bottom of the,
Yes.
zero elevation, broad, big sound mega church. And I think
Yes.
that's exactly what you're talking about, that people are looking at that and saying, these people at this church, they are
Hmm.
they might have enough self-consciousness to be a little embarrassed, but they understand just by virtue of
Hmm.
who's in the church and multi-generational church, who's in the church and what they've been through. This is where they're at. And
Yeah.
that's there's no show here. And to the degree, this is where this stuff gets weird. To the
Hmm.
degree that there is a show, it's almost embracing the cringe, even
Yes.
though
Yes. 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 That's
they're
it.
not
Mhm.
self-consciously embracing the cringe because they don't know what cringe means. They
Yes.
just
Okay.
are
So
it. Yes, please.
can I give another term to that?
Yes.
There is self-aware cringe and there is non-self-aware cringe. So the meta modern mind is actually warm and accepting and sees this as an expression of the wholesome self-aware cringe. Non-self-aware cringe. So I think what you're getting at is maybe we're using these hand gestures of like, higher and lower, and we maybe could flip that so people don't feel offended if they're in one of those two spaces. But in either way, that kind of seems like the cool option, right? Your smells and bells, or you're doing U2 and Coldplay really, really well, or at least at better than your local karaoke band can, right? Those are the two options. And largely, here's the weird thing, and I don't mean to use these terms in a pejorative sense, but the kind of copying the U2 Coldplay concert thing, while I do know plenty of people my age that are in those contexts that are finding those churches to be really, really important and meaningful in their life, that is still kind of largely, you used a name earlier, Bill Hybels. That's still largely the boomer model.
Yep.
And I hate using that because I don't want to make it. I'm just saying as a generational term,
Yep.
that's still kind of the boomer model. And then you have maybe those that have lived through that model. That's their thesis. So we'll get into kind of some like Hegelian dialectical stuff here. That's their thesis. And if you grew up in that, you've probably had a bunch of conversations with people that spent time in that. And that has, in some sense, that's become white noise to them. So they can't find meaning. The vocabulary is not meaningful to them anymore. And that's not even like, it doesn't even have to be deconstruction, right? It can be just like an expansion of going, oh, I've talked this way and I need some other vocabulary. That's normal for us. As we grow, our vocabulary expands, our musical tastes change, the movies we like, the books we read. And so like the antithesis becomes the liturgical. It's the smells and the bells, the high church liturgy. And I think what's really interesting is like um I want to celebrate both of those, and they're wonderful churches doing all of them, and this can be a really strange thing where people pin their flag in a particular camp and say ours reigns supreme, and we've got the sub IQ people over here that do that, and we've got the elitists over here, and I don't like that stuff at all because I know people in all of those spaces and they're good people there. What I do find interesting is this kind of like if you were heavily, which it'd be hard to be my age and not have this experience. If you were heavily culturally programmed by the postmodern anti-story to be highly cynical, highly self-aware all the time, you have to signal to people because all stories mask a play for power. You have to signal to people that you are in a story, right? If that's been part of your programming, you can't just Men in Black, mind wipe that. It's in there, but now you're looking to get out of the deconstruction mode to stop just moving away from things that you name not as good, and instead you're trying to navigate what is the good you should pursue. I think you could anticipate that kind of grammar and vocabulary of going, all right, I have to be self-aware. I have to kind of still maybe signal I know I'm in a story, but instead of saying all stories mask a play for power, we do the meta step. The meta step is going, well, if all stories mask a play for power, that too is a story that masks a play for power, and maybe I can just choose one.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
once you've done that, you're able to kind of accept that I am in a cringeworthy story.
Yep.
It like,
Yep.
and
Yep.
then that embrace the cringe term has been a phrase I've been using for a while since, and this is what the creed thing was. It was like a microcosm, and we can see this across in many, many other domains as well. But the creed thing was kind of like this strange microcosm of that. People going, I don't, I know that it's cringe, so I am self-aware. I'm not just saying like, oh, I actually think this is better musically than beat the Beatles or Beethoven. I'm accepting that it's pretty formulaic. It's uber sincere. It's not raging against the machine, and it's kind of syrupy, but I like the way it makes me feel, and I feel more wholesome. I don't want to feel the absence of the wholesome anymore. I don't want to feel
Mm,
cynicism anymore. I'm exhausted
mm,
by it. It has become, David Foster Wallace predicted this way back in the 90s when he, at the forefront of high culture, was seeing the inevitable end of postmodern art and storytelling, and described that when Burger King is selling you burgers with the slogan, you gotta break the rules, that postmodernism had hit its end game. And now it would be experienced by people as a cynical prison. He also used this interesting term, patricide,
mm.
which he described postmodernism as inherently patricidal, that it is fundamentally, and I got more thinking to do on this, and maybe there's probably some other people in the corner that have interests in maybe kind of like Joseph Campbell's hero's journey stuff. But I found that interesting because, Joseph Campbell's monomyth, one of the key features before you return home with the elixir is what, he would have called the confrontation or with the Father, right? So that's
Yeah.
Luke facing
Yeah.
Vader,
Yeah.
and that's a common theme.
Yeah.
And I wonder just like culturally if we've done the patricidal thing, which is to say
Mm,
we're killing off tradition, we're rebelling against our past, but we didn't get the elixir out of it, right? And instead we have this strange meaning crisis, and now we're kind of renegotiating that relationship with our if you will, our cultural father, which is Christianity. It is this navigating of the postmodern and the modern story to try to find some synthesis. So you'll hear meta modern thinkers talk about the synthesis, and the oscillation between values and stories. So I think, when you go to a church and it's like they've got a guy who's playing the bass, who's probably like a CPA during the week, and you got a guy sitting on a djembe or a cajon instead of like a 10-piece drum kit, and someone plunking away on the keyboards, and maybe they're still doing like Chris Tomlin songs, even though Chris Tomlin is not in vogue at the U2 concert church anymore. There's something sincere, and they know they're not doing something cool.
right.
And I think that's really, really powerful and really attractive to people right now. So I
Yeah.
don't find it. This little corner, the people in this little corner are, and the conversations you're having over the years, Paul, are always kind of like on the front edge of the cultural shifts as they're happening, which make for someone that likes studying that stuff a really interesting case study to see the rando conversations. So it's no surprise to me that they don't want the performative, they don't want authenticity as a brand,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
like
yep,
what
yep,
a Gen X move was.
yep, yep.
So we're going to make authenticity a brand, and they don't want that. I think they're fine with the self-aware cringe.
Yeah. Well, and I so when I was in Melbourne in 2019, because my friend Warren Mills, he wasn't my friend before, he this complete rando says, "You're going to come to Australia." And my wife's like, "How do you know he's not an axe murderer? I mean, you're going to be all the way in Australia, and he's going to." I said, "Nah, I'll take the risk." And Warren is not an axe murderer, and
Mm.
I've developed a wonderful friendship with Warren over the years. But I remember he was Warren started in a dispensational church. He was grew up in a dispensational church, just got really sick of the dispensationalism, didn't believe in any more. And then he went to a charismatic church and spent years in a full charismatic church. And for the last, he's in his 70s now, for the last 10, 15 years or so, he goes to a highly traditional liturgical Anglican church. Now, saying that now in 2025 surprises no one who listens to my channel now. But back
Right.
in the early 20 teens, that was a strange move. And
Yeah.
and Australia sort of follows California, but it takes a while for things to get over the Pacific. It's a big ocean. And so I talked to Matt, who is the priest at that Anglican church, because he's in Australia, and Australia is just the land of Hillsong, and I mean,
Yep.
it's the land of that big
Hmm.
worship. And so here's this poor little guy. He's got this. The church is doing okay. He's got some people there. Even someone I got there, and there was a woman on staff who was like, "Oh, you're Christian Reformed." She had been to Calvin College, and she's like, "Oh, now I
Mm.
know why you're here, because you Calvin College people are sort of cultural, exegetes. That's what you do at Calvin College.
Yeah.
So that's why you're
Yeah.
that's why you're studying Jordan Peterson." So I was like, "Yeah, that's true." But
Hmm.
I told Matt, I said, you might not feel this now, but you're at the bleeding edge of something big that's coming your way. And he looked at me like, "You're out of your mind." I think
Because he
now
wasn't trying to, right?
no, he was just, he this for him, this really traditional Anglican stuff. I mean, that was the first time in my Protestant life I ever took communion at a kneeler at the rail. In church history, I heard all about the rail and all of this stuff, and I got up there. It's
Yeah.
like, here I am, a Calvinist at the rail, the dreaded rail. And I took communion, which I'm not allowed to do in the Orthodox or Catholic churches, but God bless them, I'm okay. But and so then I sort of feel like that at Living Stones, because I sort of
Mm.
instinctively I've tried as best I could to sort of leave my hand. I mean, first talk with Jonathan Peugeot, he's like, "Tell me about your church's liturgy." And I said, "Jonathan, it's a mess." And it's not a mess. And I know Chemo's going to listen to this, so I've kind of told him, but it's not a mess I'm interested in straightening out. And
Mm.
I know that for some of our people, that's going to be like, "Wow, no, you should." And I've done tinkering. The liturgy isn't the liturgy at Living Stones. It's very Christian Reformed down at its roots. It's very low church. It's very plain. It's very sparse.
Mhm.
But I basically give the members of the church a very free hand. Every now and then, I'll step in and say, "Let's not sing that song again," or "Let's do this a little bit." Every now and then I'll just give it a little nudge just to kind of keep it in the
Mhm.
Christian ball field. But this is, but and there are Sundays that, there's a slide that goes up or a song that gets picked or a someone will say something in the process of the liturgy and I'll cringe inside. Feel like, oh.
Mm,
But then I say, you leave it. You just
mm,
leave it because I'm a low church Protestant, and I don't think the high church
mm,
people will disagree with this either, but the liturgy is the work of the people. And
mhm,
so they bring, in a place like Living Stones, they bring their best to God, and it's their best. And I don't put a ruler up from Willow Creek or the Anglicans, or I
mm.
really resist putting that rule. I have some Christian Reform guardrails here. But and I was just Sunday, I was thinking about that because every now and then something will make just a little cringe inside. But no, that's it's a beauty I want to preserve. And then,
Mm.
and maybe you're gonna say, Paul, you're at the bleeding edge of something. Don't worry, it's coming. And I'm just like, I don't know if Living Stones will be alive by the time it shows up, but here we are,
Oh
and we're not
God.
gonna stop. At least as long as
Oh
we
my
can.
goodness.
But
Well,
and I go ahead.
I was just wondering how much we're using some categories here of different traditions and streams, and I think since we last talked, a word you've used, and it was something I really wanted to see how you felt today. I mean, you just got back from Estuary, which is, I don't know if ecumenical is the best word because it even expands beyond, outside of those that would
Outside of
claim the Christian
Christianity.
story and Christian community as home.
Yep.
And so you've used this term like metagetical, or right? And
Metangelical.
yeah, okay. And so I'm curious how much you're even seeing over these last few years as you kind of take this little corner as maybe a sample size, and it's not indicative of where the center of the bell curve is by any means, right? But you're seeing kind of these like messier intersections too. So I know you probably have some familiarity with like a Robert Weber. And when you started using that term, it reminded me of Robert Weber,
Yeah.
who had coined the term ancient future
Yeah.
worship to describe the way in which he saw, again, this would be within the Protestant world, people were expressing more openness to different facets of the church with a capital C across traditions and trying to kind of find a way of synthesizing them together so it wouldn't, and this happens everywhere. It happens everywhere. Last year I turned on, oh, what do they call it? Your Catholic friends, Roman Catholic friends will have to correct me. It was kind of like the annual, what do they call it? The annual Eucharistic Adoration Conference or something like that. I actually think it might have been in the Midwest
Hmm.
somewhere. So big conference, big arena, and I get at the time we had cable, and I got one of the Catholic TV networks that was on. So I was flipping through the channels and saw it, and what made me stop was I saw nuns in the congregation, now N-U-N-S, not N-O-N-E-S. Maybe there were some of those there too. And they were singing a song that one of my friends, who I just had on the podcast last week, John Mark McMillan, who's had these big hit songs in evangelical world, they were singing one of his songs at this Catholic conference. And John Mark shares this charismatic evangelical background that I grew up with
Hmm.
too.
Hmm.
And I took a quick recording. I was like, John Mark, you got to see this. They're singing your song at this
Yeah.
huge Catholic conference.
Yeah.
And so it's not just like the evangelicals are bringing in, or a CRC church or a Presbyterian church might be bringing in sacramental liturgy. I've got friends here that pastor one of the, if you were to come to the Twin Cities and ask, what is one of the most thriving churches for young people that are just exploding at the seams? My friends over at Everyday Church in Roseville, and I know the pastors really, really well there. When they moved into their new building, they renovated an LA Fitness, which is a very, kind of evangelical thing to do. We don't have sanctuaries that we've built over, or
Yep.
cathedrals we've built over centuries. They renovated an LA Fitness, and when they had like the consecration of their building, they led with a Eucharistic procession. They had
Mm.
the elements of the bread and wine at the front of the
Wow.
procession, and every week they have the bread and wine out for
Yeah.
people to participate in communion in the most, not the most,
Yeah.
very Bethel Redding
Yep.
adjacent
Yep.
upper room in Dallas. Some
Yep.
people might be familiar with that culture.
Yep.
Very, you'd almost say like post third wave charismatic.
Yep.
And I'm like, I'm going, that's awesome because
Yep.
I see the value in that stuff. So when you're talking about the metagelic, I still can't say it right, which
Metangelical.
might be, yeah, there we go. When you've been talking about that, is that similar to what you
Yeah.
saw Robert
Oh,
Weber describing?
well, Weber was fairly early on, and
Oh yeah, for sure.
he noted it in terms of liturgy. And so
Yes.
he was early on, and there's obviously a deep tie between, let's say, this. When I say metagelical, let me unpack the term a little bit just so people
Yeah.
understand what I'm saying. End of the American Civil War. It's terrible when you study history because you start things like end of the American Civil War. End of the American Civil War. You have the beginnings of what will later be called the main line in American Christianity. The northern churches, in a sense, try to reseed the South with um, post slavery churches. I mean, you can read Mark Knoll about this, the Civil
Mhm.
War as a theological crisis, and so this main line becomes in America the alternative to the state churches that we had in Europe, whether it's
Mhm.
Orthodox or Roman Catholic and Latin Christendom. In America, you have the separation. They do not, there are state churches early on in the different states, but the United States is sort of a weird thing in that they're the United States. And of course, the Civil War is also elicits a transformation in terms of the American government, where the federal government definitely becomes stronger after the Civil War in the process of fighting this war. But the state churches die out in the early part of the 19th century. And then this whole question of the relationship between civilization and institution in America happens via, let's say, there's a spirit of the wasp in American culture. White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. These were the beginning of the 20th century. These were the cultural elites, the rulers, and there've been some attention paid to
Mhm.
them. Aaron Renn has certainly paid some attention to this. Not enough people have, I don't think. What begins to happen then in the middle of the 20th century, FDR is one of the very early people to begin to enfold Catholics and Jews into, let's say, the
Mhm.
elite sectors of American culture. And then, of course, after the Second World War, you've got the civil rights movement. To what degree do the descendants of former slaves, will they be included in the upper tiers of American society? And this ball keeps rolling, but it's 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 important to consider, let's say, the relationship of what happens to state churches in Europe and the rise of the nation state. Of course, Bismarck has his culture Kampf because when he's trying to integrate Germany, he begins to realize that, well, you've got Protestant and Catholic, or you got Lutheran, Reformed, and Catholic, and you got the Anabaptist sprinkled throughout. Italy, it becomes a huge crisis because basically the only way Italy can unify is at the death of the papal states. And so the Pope
Mhm.
becomes the prisoner of the Vatican. So you've got all this stuff happening in the 19th and then bleeding into the 20th century of this relationship between formal structures of religious churches and states, nation states. And all kinds of really interesting. When I was in Italy 2 summers ago, I read a bunch of interesting history on the history of the papacy. especially with respect to the Second World Wars and fascism, because fascism was sort
Mhm.
of a modern monarchy that the Catholic Church
Mhm.
saw. Maybe there's an opportunity for us to once again engage
Mhm.
in this question of, question that I'm rereading now, Millennium, Tom Holland's Dominion Before Dominion. And what happens in America is so different. You have the main
Mhm.
line, and everybody understood there was a hierarchy in the main line. The Episcopalians were at the top, and then the Presbyterians, and then the Methodists, and then you have, the Baptists and the Pentecostals, but they were very much on the underside there. And then part of what happens as the modernist fundamentalist split continues to open up, you have this middle section that grows who are the neo-evangelicals, because of course that word
Mhm.
evangelical had been used for just Protestants in Europe, but the neo-evangelicals, Billy Graham, you know, Henry, Gay, Fuller, Christianity Today, all of this
Mhm.
stuff, Wheaton, you have this rise of these neo-evangelicals. And of course, as you get into the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you have all of that history that goes in. You have the decline of the main line. A lot of mainliners are sort of moving towards evangelical. And what happens with evangelicalism is that you begin to get sort of the next evolution of what had kind of been a mainline consensus, but as the mainline continues to deteriorate, you begin to get this evangelical consensus where people
Mhm.
can worship together. They can take communion together. At the beginning, up until the 1960s or 70s, if you wanted to take communion in a Christian Reformed church, you had to go before the elders. My mother, who was baptized in the church, her husband, my father, would preach in on vacation. My mother would still have to ask the elders to take communion. It's like everybody knows who you
Wow.
are and where you've been and what you've done, and
Wow.
still they're,
Yeah.
guarding the table. But
Yeah.
but what happens in evangelical churches is that there's sort of again a new consensus and community of churches that recognize each other. The confessional things are still talked about and debated a little bit, but for the most part,
Mhm.
you see it sort of arise. And again, according to Mark Knoll, this kind of comes out of the frontier experience. Are they going
Mhm.
to a Bible believing church? That then becomes kind of they're a Bible believing church. Well, what do they believe about the Bible?
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't really matter so much as long as they believe in the Bible. And what we're
Yep.
seeing now is, although at our conferences, our estuary conferences, I will usually say, if we're going to do a worship service after, let's not do communion at that church, because already
Mm.
after the Midwest Jewry Conference, the Orthodox are going to look for an Orthodox church to go to. The Catholics are going to
Mhm.
look for a Catholic church to go to. But all the Bible believing and a bunch of the seekers and stuff, they might go to that Protestant church, because the Catholics and
Mm.
the Orthodox and we can't share the table right now, but there we are sharing a lot. And so this evangelical spirit is bleeding into the Catholics and the Orthodox. And on one hand, you might ask them officially, do you recognize Protestants as Christians? Of course, well, there's that Vatican II, and Orthodox are
Mhm.
a
Yeah.
really wild tribe. So we're seeing Roman Catholics and Orthodox participating in a broader communion of sorts. And
Mhm.
that's very much going on in this little corner of the internet. We have strong voices from Orthodoxy, strong voices from Catholicism, and strong voices of people who, John Vervaeke, a non-theist, but we're figuring out how to have productive relationships with each other towards mutual ends. And so
Mhm.
even the pretty significant wall between Protestants and the rest of the church, that wall is getting semi-permeable. And
Mm.
of course, that's downstream of the internet. That's downstream of a lot that's going on.
Mm.
But and to me, it's only natural, because the truth is we've all been reading each other's stuff for a long time now. Can't Protestants? I mean, you look at
It's not a surprise.
That's right. You look
Yeah,
at Dallas Willard, you look
for
at
sure.
John Mark Comer
Yeah.
right now, who's a name that people
Hmm.
will recognize.
Yep.
You look at the Renovare movement.
Hmm.
We're there, human beings are cultural sharers and appropriators. That's what we do.
Hmm.
And you cannot you cannot be doing Catholic or Orthodox ministry in North America for a certain amount of time and a certain amount of size when you're not going to have to learn from the Protestants on all sorts of
Yeah.
levels that are going to impact your church. You know,
Hmm.
you run in a big Orthodox church. Who's your insurance carrier? I bet you it's Church Mutual. I mean, it's
Hmm.
it's at
Hmm.
all these levels.
Yeah.
These
Yeah.
don't these levels don't go away, and it's not like you can sort of, yeah, we're an Orthodox church and we're doing church just like we'll say the Apostle Paul, but it's maybe more John Chrysostom. But
Hmm.
we've got liability insurance. We are
Hmm.
fingerprinting nursery workers. We are,
Yeah.
and we are learning from Protestants, and Protestants are learning from Catholics and Orthodox. And Protestants have been
Hmm.
doing this code sharing for a while, but now it's happening further. And nobody
Hmm.
quite knows where this is going, but I see what is happening, at least from what I see in this little corner of the internet. This is what's happening.
Hmm. Yeah,
And sometimes I listen
absolutely.
to Orthodox. There was a group of Orthodox that did a conversation. Is modern psychology demonic? And I thought, oh, well, you're kind of fundamentalist, aren't you? I mean, because I've heard
I heard that stuff
fundamentalists.
back in Focus on the Family in the 90s, right?
Exactly. And then one of the guys says, well, if it's an Orthodox therapist, then it's okay. It's like,
Mm.
oh,
Hmm.
we've watched all of this stuff happen before. Now you've got black robes, you've got icons, you've got all this, but
Hmm.
there's other stuff going on.
Mm.
And that, of course, is, as you said, beyond just the Christian frame as well.
Hmm.
So,
Okay, so let me I have to I think of it through the kind of like cultural theology lens. That might not be the best lens, but I want to throw something your way and you tell me what you think about it. So if you take kind of like, I don't know, my cultural theologian synthesis here, which is grabbing from a bunch of places I can't break down right now. But if you think of culture in the here at Hofstede, some people say Hofstede, some people say Hofstede, Dutch social psychologist, he called culture mind software. So, you have human nature, which is shared from either you can take this from a theological perspective in Adam, right? Or you can take it from a biological perspective. There are distinct human nature features that are similar, that are, just like we could say a dolphin has a dolphin nature, and acknowledging there's variation. We have these innate human desires that are you can see across time, across culture, but culture becomes the way that those desires take unique shape and can get formed in unique ways. And all cultures have several, key ingredients. They have a guiding story. So they have a story that they tell together, which brings them into religio, right? That bonding, the union, and of course, and we've both, I think, have talked along these terms that religion is best understood as what is the highest story of that which is of ultimate concern. It tells you what is the story at the highest level that should unite us together. So, substitute religions typically do a bad job of this. Like if you think of politics as a substitute religion, it does a bad job because it only answers a range of questions, but can't answer questions about metaphysics or ontology. So religion is about figuring out that story. So you got guiding stories, you have values, and the values that you implicitly extract from those guiding stories become the things that shape your behaviors. And then you also have symbols and rituals, right? So the symbols are the aesthetic windows to the values. So we just saw, like, was it just last week or 2 weeks ago, President Trump's executive order about, you burn an American flag, you're going to jail for 1 year. Now, we won't get into the constitutional law about that. Like, setting that aside, it's a weird thing.
Right.
Why would burning a fabric that has the colors red, white, and blue, if it was a t-shirt that had that fabric, why would that be an acceptable? It'd be a strange thing to do if I did it in my front yard, but it wouldn't be as unacceptable if I did it with a flag that has those same colors.
With a
It's because
crowd
that aesthetic symbol.
around. I mean, there's
Yes,
context, there's set and setting for this.
exactly. So obviously those symbols connect us to the values and then to the story. And then you have the rituals, which are the way you reenact the story. So when you were talking about like the liturgy, um, in what kind of levels, I see maybe what you're talking about as like a constant re-navigation or a constant dialogue about what will be the story that unites us together. So, what is the story that we can say at some level is shared enough between you and I and John Vervaeke and Jonathan Pajot? I've never talked to Jonathan. You've had him on a few times, or a Sam Tiedemann, right? And we all come from these different subcultures and microcultures, but when you get together and you have a Midwestuary liturgy, what is the story that you see uniting all of you
Yeah.
together?
Yeah. I think, we could talk estuary in that because
Hmm.
estuary
Hmm.
actually has a protocol. So an
Okay.
estuary, and in real life estuary meeting, which is a small group meeting in evangelical terms, you can talk about 8 to 10, 12 people.
Hmm.
Beyond that, it sort of breaks down. There is a protocol. There is a liturgy to that meeting. And the liturgy is very sparse. It's very simple. There's no supernaturalism required of anyone. It's just you introduce yourself, you pitch an idea to the group, you point to somebody else's idea, and you play. You have the conversation.
Okay.
That's the liturgy in an
Did that
estuary meeting.
did that emerge from trial and error, Paul, or was that an explicit naming of values and then you were building the protocols around those values? How did it
Trial and error.
functionally?
So
Okay.
so well, let's have the story of estuary here. So the
Yes,
story
let's
of
do it.
estuary goes like this. It's in some ways starts with Freddie and Paul. When Freddie comes up to me and says, "Hey, Pastor Paul, why don't you and me do a television show?" And that has its own roots back there. And I'm not going to go down to public access TV with Freddie on Saturday mornings at 8 o'clock. So I said, Freddie, I've got a smartphone here, and why don't we'll just do a little something. I'll put it up on YouTube, and I'll send you and your mom the link, and you can watch it. And so the Freddie and
Mhm.
Paul show starts, and we have people from the church on, and we have music, we have rap, and we talk about sports. That's the liturgy of the Freddie and Paul show. And but that had me. I was thinking about the fact that most of the people in my church don't read a lot of books.
Mhm.
And those who do read books they read for pleasure. They might read Christian romance novels or, a genre I've never personally partaken
Yep.
in at all. Um, but
Shocking.
yeah, but
Shocking
my
to hear
church
that, Paul.
library has quite a bit of it because
I
nobody
was
knows.
I was surveying the books in your background going,
No, none of
is there any
those.
Christian romance back
Church
there?
church libraries are where
For
people
sure.
where the very limited group of avid readers go
Hmm.
to get rid of their books because their home bookshelves are filling up. So they give it to the church if it's a
Yeah.
Christian book. So we got a whole
Hmm.
section of anyway. It's so funny because we had a guy in a visitor from the YouTube land came in Sunday, and as usually happens at some point before the church, if there's not a lot of people here, which there usually aren't, they go over to the library and they start looking through the library, and here we're back into this whole cringe thing because it's like, yeah, I
Uh,
don't know if you're really gonna, if you want to take some of these books home, you're more than welcome to, my friend. Anyway, so Jordan Peterson does this thing, and I'm
mhm.
reading Neil Postman, Amusing Ourselves to Death, a book that I had read back in the 80s. And I'm thinking about media, and I'm watching Peterson, and I'm thinking, there's something about this YouTube. Because I'd never really
Mhm.
watched anything in any seriousness on YouTube, and now I'm watching Peterson. And so I decided, and I couldn't, I was trying to talk to colleagues about Jordan Peterson, and why would I listen to
Yeah.
2 hour videos?
Cool.
I'm a busy man. All right, fine. But I said, I
Yeah.
think this is going to be a really big deal. But
Hmm.
so I make a video and I think this isn't going to go anywhere, but it did. And then suddenly I've got lots and lots of people that just want to talk to me pastorally about Jordan
Hmm.
Peterson. And then some of those people are like, we should start a meetup. And in the back of my mind, I thought, I'm not going to say no to you because I don't want to say no to you because I have this bias towards trying things that leads to the chaos of liturgy at Living Stones,
Hmm.
but, or the cringe of liturgy at Living Stones, but okay. And I thought for the 3 or 4 people that wanted to be done, I would get a meetup.com. It cost me $80, which is fine. And I would put that up, and the 3 or 4 people that wanted the meetup would show. And a dozen people showed up. And it was like, what's going on with this? And then it's like, well, I'll do it again next month. And 20 people
Hmm.
showed up. About 15 of those people didn't show up the first month. And so month
Hmm.
after month after month, then I'm doing it twice a month. And I've got 30, 40, 50 people in for these Jordan Peterson meetups. But we don't quite know what to do with them because with church
Hmm.
small groups, I sometimes split them up. And so we tried a bunch of things to try to get conversations, but that Jordan Peterson moment wasn't sort of a deep enough well that the conversations didn't start to sort of bottom out into grievance sections. And in a place like
Hmm.
Sacramento, you got a lot of California state employees that were getting just tired of certain state policies with respect to things Jordan. So Jordan Peterson was complaining out,
Yeah.
and you can only, as a pastor, you've got a high tolerance for listening to people complain because you listen to a lot of people complain as a pastor, but that's not the basis of a good thing. So Jordan got sick, and I'm doing these meetup things with John Van Donk, and we're doing this sort of meetup tour that John and I and Job are at, and COVID
Hmm.
comes. But we knew we needed something
Hmm.
else. So Jordan's sick. We've got COVID. Might as well pause this whole thing. And then John and I keep talking about, okay, let's ditch the Jordan Peterson meetups because
Hmm.
even though people still want to come to talk about Jordan Peterson, the conversations aren't really that satisfying anymore. And then it was really John that's like, well, why don't we do something like this? And it was just super simple. And it's like, yeah, let's do that. And so then we start playing around with this thing. And our first European tour, John and I go over there, and we're just starting to talk about it. Well, I named the thing because this is very metagelical because of where I am in town, a lot of people knock on my door because they want gas money, help with
Hmm.
electrical bill, some food. They have a lot of physical needs,
Yep.
and in a
Hmm.
place like this, I'm a rare church where they can actually call the phone or knock on the door and you will meet the pastor. And it was just like people in California don't want to talk to me because I'm a pastor for all of their expectations of who pastors
Hmm.
are. And I want something where church people and non-church people can actually sit down together and really have a meaningful conversation. And this can be sustained. So that's the image
Hmm.
behind Estuary. And this little protocol helps that happen. And so Vendonk and I go to Europe, and night after night, we go to places. People have basically come because they've seen me on YouTube, but we get 5,
Hmm.
10, 15, 20 people in a room who don't know each other at all. The only thing they have in common is they've watched me on YouTube a little bit, and we do this protocol. And doggone it, we're having some amazing conversations. And
Huh.
it's like, so then John and I are talking, and John's like, well, what are we going to do with this program? I said, well, we need a leader training program. And so
Huh.
John did that. So he did ElseNet, where you can go on a Zoom meeting, and all you do is you just do this dumb little protocol. Anybody can memorize this thing almost instantly. It's super short and simple, but you just practice it on the Zoom. And once you've practiced it on the Zoom and you've talked about, then you can sort of start doing it in other places. So, and what's beautiful about the protocol is it doesn't usually degenerate into griping about Trump or Gaza or you know
Hmm.
it doesn't get into these
Yeah.
quagmires that the open-ended conversations had by virtue of
Hmm.
how the process works. And
Hmm.
it shows that people are really hungry for relationship and conversation. And there's not a lot of good spaces for it that are facilitating it. So
Hmm.
then, so
Can I pick
the
at two things?
yeah, go ahead. What's that?
Okay, because I want to pick at two things you said to get more clarification. So I find it interesting you've mentioned two words that seem kind of abstract as a value. When I asked you the question, did you have a set of values and then you built the protocol around it, or was it more you were doing stuff and it emerged? But you mentioned two things that stood out to you as I think interesting. You said you juxtaposed certain conversations as kind of devolving into that sort of stuff that it wasn't what you were looking for, right?
Right.
The kind of we're just going to repeat CNN or Fox News talking points, that sort of stuff. We're not going to do that. And then you juxtapose that against something that worked, but the thing that made it work was your experience of it being meaningful. And you also used an interesting word that you said it was just amazing. And I'm wondering if you could drill down a little deeper into that because I kind of get the sense that when you say something works, maybe this is kind of what you all were processing a weekend or two ago in Chicago, because I think it was Fellowship of the Spirit was the theme.
Yep.
What is the sense? It reminded me a little bit as you're describing it of often what like in my charismatic and Pentecostal days, how little planning actually went into liturgy per se, and you were just kind of feeling for something everybody almost strangely agreed worked, unless you brought someone else in from outside of the community into that. So let's say you brought a guest speaker that was a cessationist Calvinist into the hyper charismatic church, and you brought them in as a guest speaker. And if they stuck to their guns, people in the community might have said, well, that didn't work. What is the working part? So now you've got this protocol because, and that's the thing I'm really interested in. It's kind of an act of metacognition to go, all right, because I actually think what's in there might be an implied value, and there might already be a story there that if we can name might just help us give some language to better understand what are we doing. Because sometimes we might all say, well, this works. And then you bring someone else into the mix and they go, well, that doesn't work
Yeah.
for me. And it's
Yeah.
from my understanding, I would say it's because they're not operating with the shared stories, shared values that you are.
Yeah.
So when you and John are having these discussions and you're like, oh, here's the protocols that work. What is the working?
So people, especially men, usually pitch ideas. What
Yeah.
works is so in my we run every week estuary at Livingstone's because I also
Hmm.
noticed that it worked better the more you increase the reps.
Hmm.
And so in my little group in Sacramento, we've got some women, African American women who are in their 80s who grew up in the Jim Crow South, have
Hmm.
incredible stories. And they're
Hmm.
amazing people. They're so full of wisdom and kindness. And and then I've got some younger guys who know the internet. Of course, those women don't know the internet at all. And the younger guys know the
Right.
internet and they sort of watch some of my videos. And they come into
Hmm.
that meeting and they want to talk about some thinky talky thing I talked about this week on my videos because they like that stuff.
Hmm.
But then when some of these other people begin to talk, I find these people from very different backgrounds becoming friends with people that
Hmm.
through no other process that I know of in this world would these people become friends and begin sharing life
Hmm.
together. And
Hmm.
I've taught a lot of Sunday schools, I've taught a lot of Bible studies, but I can't think of any single session of Estuary that I've done. Now, I've done hundreds of meetings now. Well, the ones that I've done here at Livingstone's with my every week group on Sunday morning, I can't think of any time that I've never walked away from that group saying to myself, holy cow, what just happened?
Mhm.
These
Mm.
people, church people and non-church people, they talked about what was something that was meaningful to them and important to them, and they left this
Mhm.
group with a little bit of wisdom for life. They might not be able to say
Mhm.
exactly how it is, but the reason I know they did was because they came back at
Mhm.
9 a.m. on a Sunday morning again next week.
Huh.
And so at Midwestuary, we had 35 groups basically chosen at random from the 350 conference attendees. The groups were a little large because, when you've got that kind of scale, eight is sort of the ideal size. 10, 12 gets a little tough, but you can still
Mhm.
do it. I'd say I've heard now stories from a couple of people that their group didn't work. But out of 35 groups of selected randos, now they're not completely random because they're drawn to the conference.
Self-selected.
It's
Yeah.
self-selected. But
Yeah.
I knew right away just because I had responsibilities in the thing, I couldn't hit every group, so I missed the first one. But I embedded myself with one group, and everybody stays in one group. And
Hmm.
and by the second meeting of that group, I was astounded at the honesty and vulnerability with which people were sharing and the wholesome way that people were
Mm.
engaging with people who were sharing really difficult, sometimes dark things. And I'm thinking,
Mm.
these people didn't know each other yesterday. And they've
Yeah.
just put something on the table that they
Yeah.
probably, now to a degree, there's anonymity there. So
Mhm.
they put
Yeah.
something on the table that they probably don't share with their parents.
Absolutely.
And they, and, we have speakers on stage and we do the plenary session
Mm.
thing. But the liturgy is when you first get to the meeting, you get assigned to a group. And so the first thing that happens, you might have come to that conference alone, but after an hour and a
Mm.
half in that little circle, you have someone to sit with when you go to that plenary
Yeah.
session. You have someone to eat lunch
Mm.
with after the plenary session. And then you go back down to
Mm.
that group and you've got a whole bunch of ideas from the plenary session. And you've spent the day with this person that you've just met. And now you're in this room again and we're ready to go a little deeper. And we're
Mm.
ready to, and again, you don't have to pitch anything that was said in the big room. You can pitch whatever's on your mind. Maybe it's, as a preacher, the most powerful things in a sermon are not what the preacher said. The most powerful things in the sermon are what the preacher said provoked in you. That's the power in the
What it made
sermon.
you feel.
That's right.
What it made you feel,
Yep.
right? That's the thing that's
And so this is what's happening in these groups.
yeah.
And so then people are making friendship. They're creating friendships
Yes.
and they're
Yeah.
having space where they can continue to deepen their friendships.
Mm-hmm.
And and I'm careful. I always say Estuary's church adjacent because
Yeah.
once you get into church, you've got questions of
Mm-hmm.
confessions and theology, and all those things are important questions. I'm a confessional Christian Reformed minister. I
Right.
agree with these things. I live in that world, but there needs to be this space adjacent to it where the church needs this so they can connect with the
Mm-hmm.
world, and the world needs this so that some of the blessings the church gives to the world can be given to these people, not just the blessings of a trunk or treat or a food pantry or a
Mm-hmm.
Habitat for Humanity project or a hospital, but the blessings of increasingly, I think in our culture, we are going to see people who can function and live productively and at peace with other people. And people, by virtue of the chaos that they have grown up in, are seriously struggling to have any meaningful relationship with another human being. And most of what
Absolutely.
they're digesting are the parasocial relationships with beings of light on screens. And so
Yes.
this is what we need for a
Absolutely.
world that is going down a hole.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had
Okay.
there's lots of other groups that do this, AA, so and so. I'll shut up.
Right, right, right. This is really fascinating to me, Paul, because well, I kind of want to even just break the fourth wall for a moment and invite the people that are regular participants in this. And I will come back and read the comment section because the question you mentioned this about it's not the contents as in the propositional information, the propositional knowledge that people take away from a talk, from a sermon. It's what it made them feel. And to break the fourth wall, I will definitely go through the comments because I want to know what do people feel when they have left an estuary group that they said that worked. Because that idea of this worked is really interesting because there's like an implied range of values that seem to be like we share these values. How much of this is cultural? How much of it is speaking to an innate human desire that's part of our human nature? So some of the things I heard you mention is wholesome. People feel more wholesome coming out of it, which is I would say, probably the most fundamental feeling that in our day and age in particular, it's a perennial human need, but particularly in our postmodern, meta modern shift, that sense of fragmentation, the sense that I'm infinitely being fragmented and pulled in all sorts of directions. Wholesome. You mentioned wisdom. So when you were talking about the older African American ladies in your church, that they have a wisdom that doesn't come from, mastery of propositional. They have the procedural and the participatory from lived experience. And you know already as a preacher that the people remember your stories more than they do, well, here are the three take home ideas or
Yeah.
here's my 7 points for the, it's not that. They'll come back and be like, I remember when you told me, you talked about that random bunny trail story that you kind of went off on, right? That's what they remember. You said kindness. You said, oh, this was really interesting to me. Okay. So I think this one gets to maybe a kind of like the core human nature. You said something along the lines of people feel a sense of personal value in their own story as they're sharing together and that it's affirmed. And I was wondering if that mapped onto kind of like the classic psychological model. I know John, as in Vervaeke, has some rebuttals to the classical model from Steger and whoever the other guy was about coherence, purpose, and significance as the foundational pillars. But let's just take those for a moment. It sounds like you've named the sense of significance in that when I share my story with someone else and it's not rejected, and let's admit probably a lot of people in the TLC corner are relatively high IQ people that are interested in things that might not put them in the dead center of the bell curve, and that can feel really alienating, right? Like I have interests, I like talking about things that I just feel like when I turn on CSI Miami, I'm not seeing these themes on there, right? And that's not to diminish people that like that stuff, but significance. And then another one, I think something along the lines of there's like in that an affirmation of agency. Like I have a significant role to play in a story that has meaning, and I am an actor in this story. Like I have something to bring to the story. And that seems like things to me that would be like, yeah, if you walked away with those feelings, that would be like that worked.
Yeah.
I wonder if you would, I mean, feel free to add any of those other things to it, but what then provides the guardrails? So, John Vervaeke talks about, like the Silk Road, the philosophical Silk Road, or maybe either he or others I've heard of use this terminology of like kind of like the hallway. We've got these different traditions and different rooms that come together, and then, you meet in the hallway. But the thing that's always stood out to me is like the hallway. This is the secular myth. The hallway isn't a story neutral space. So when we're getting together in the hallway, there are rules that govern our behavior. If we did like a Star Trek thought experiment and we invited Klingons from a Klingon room into the hallway, they're not going to value like the
True.
same. Let's duke it out here and kill each other, and that'll be a
Right.
signal of who's got the best
And I'll take
ideas.
over your
So what?
room.
Yeah, then I'll go take over your room. You could imagine ancient Spartans trying to step into an estuary group, and it just wouldn't work. So, do you have any sense when you reflect on these broad inputs and what's going on in the hallway? Do you have any sense of what is the story here
Mm,
that allows this thing to work? Because I think it used to be, when you think back when you're taking us through like post Civil War, there was kind of that mainline pluralism.
mhm,
We've long had this sense since the founding fathers that you could either something akin to, you have to either hold to like, for lack of a better term, like a Christian worldview, realizing there's numerous Christian worldviews, or you had to hold to something like natural law, right? So you could get a Neoplatonist together, you could get an Episcopalian together, and you could ask them, are there objective moral norms somewhere out there that our lives should live in adherence to? And they would say yes. But if you throw someone else, you throw like a hardcore Nietzschean, like a Nietzschean critique of ethics in there, social Darwinism in there, and it's just like, no, it's just about power, right? And ethics are decided by whoever has power. That can't be a shared story that creates for a functional, like, moral framework.
yeah.
So you couldn't have a hallway, like, just to name this more practically, like, could you drop Andrew Tate into an estuary group and have the conversation work?
Yeah. Well, the
The obvious answer is no, right? But why?
Oh, I don't know. Andrew
Oh,
might be
really?
able to handle it. I don't know. I've never met him. Because part of the issue is people on screens are not necessarily the way people
That's a
are
good
in
point.
real life,
Yes,
and
yes.
context matters.
Okay, let's
Um,
use them as an archetype instead
Okay, we'll use them
of
as an archetype.
oh,
Well, let me say
yeah, yeah.
that in the cases where the group didn't work, according to what I get told from some people, because I wasn't in those groups, it's usually because someone in the group talked too much or dominated the conversation. And so this isn't a completely open space, which is why we have estuary
Mhm.
hosts or facilitators or
Mm,
whatever name you want to give them. Their job, just like in church, people are familiar with this. Their job is to, if you do have someone who's dominating, use subtle means to sort of, rebalance the group, let's say, or if in a conference, if I were facilitating or leading a group and I had someone like that, I would probably first sort of get them a warning. I might kick him out of the group because you've got a short frame to keep the group going. Now, I remember, so people will know Joey, who from the early days of Discord server here. I remember when we first started doing meetups here at church. John Van Donk was doing his meetups in like this community center in the place that he lived, instead of in the
mhm.
church, because he said, I think people would be intimidated to go to church. And Joey,
Hmm.
who is not a Christian, Joey said, no, I like that we let you do it in church. I said, why? He said, because generally speaking, and again, this is a generality, when people go into a church, there's a sense of that's not exactly the hallway. It is not
Yeah, yeah.
empty. There's a sense of people should behave themselves, and these assumed rules of behavior, which are actually quite widespread in our culture, and in fact probably quite a bit in the world history, are politeness,
Hmm.
propriety, and as
Yeah,
Jordan Peterson, used to talk about in the early days, when you go into a room and there's chairs in the circle, you have all of this coding in terms of how to behave.
yeah.
And so
Hmm.
we are leveraging all of those things too. A church culture, civilizational culture, all of that. Part of why the estuary protocol works is that the first question I get when I tell people how these groups work is they say, what happens when someone comes in and says, gosh, I'm glad Donald Trump is president? Or someone comes in and says, man, I can't wait till Donald Trump is out of the White House. Um,
Hmm.
that is the death of the group. Why doesn't that derail the group? And the answer is that the way this protocol works, because one or two people might put that on the table, but the 7 or 8 people that are also participating hear that and they're like, I'm going to have to vote for something. I am not voting for that because people have a sense
Yeah.
of that's not where this conversation is going. That's not going to be a satisfying conversation. It's also the question of if you do this group long enough, and once people get to know each other, when someone the kind of the only rule in this group is you can't point to your own idea. You've already pitched your idea. We already know that's the idea that's the number one thing that you want
Mm,
to talk about. Maybe
mm,
you have to point to someone else in the group, which means you have to listen to the other people in the
mm,
group. And I model things. I usually have a pad of paper or a tablet or something. I take notes. And part of the reason I take notes is so I can remember. Another reason I take notes is I want to model this for the group so that people will
mm,
listen carefully to each other. And you know how unusual, but you should know, people in our
mhm,
society, they are bombarded with one direction communication, and churches do this too. Do you know how enlivening and refreshing it is for people to hear that they've been heard? And when four or five people in the group, you can pick multiple things, just don't pick them all. I like them all the same. No. You know,
mm,
one or two
mhm,
things that caught your mind. When someone, a total stranger, has listened to you and says to you, you said this, and that
mhm,
really made me think of this. That person has been heard. And then if the
mm,
group is working, it means that people are being heard. And when
mm,
I look at, let's say, the evolution of my own channel, I didn't know what I was doing, but even back to the Freddie and Paul show. So here's Freddie's pastor. Freddie's pastor cares about what Freddie thinks.
mm,
Freddie's pastor cares about the music that Freddie loves,
mhm,
which I have no background in. And here in this group, these people care about you and your
mm,
thoughts
mhm,
and your
mm,
stories. And they're going to
mm,
sit and listen. And if you keep coming to
mm,
this group, one of the
mm,
one at one meeting, one of the women said, my washing machine died, so I've been going to the laundromat. This sounds like, what kind of a pitch is this? How are we supposed to talk about you going to the laundromat? But what are you looking for in a washing machine, a top load or a front load? What kind of things are you seeing in the laundromat? But when it comes to
mm.
life, these are all the little things that make up life. And then, you meet her again and you say, Joanne, 3 weeks later, have you bought a washing machine yet? No, not really. Well, how's the laundromat thing going? I kind of like it because, I can get all my things done at once. And there's some interesting people in the laundromat that are kind of fun to watch because people like people watching. I mean, it just, and,
Mm.
and, and as you know, this is the kind of fiber that make up
Yes.
life.
So would you say then, is it too much of a stretch? I don't, is it too much of a stretch to say this, there's clearly an other-centered nature to the protocols,
Yes.
right? So you think of Paul's encouragement in Romans, right, to give preference one to another. There's a cruciform pattern here. I mean,
Yep.
is it when we talk about like what's the story that guides a culture or subculture or microculture? Story is kind of like it's like a meta pattern. It's a connection of all sorts of patterns. And at the core of the story is like something that holds that story together. And so even it seems like I don't want to make it too much of a stretch here, but I mean, it seems like the thing that holds it together, it would not be held together if you did not take on a cruciform ethos of saying, my goal here is to give preference to you. And as we mutually share that together, as we take on, as we participate in the pattern of the cross, which I know that that might sound like a stretch. I'm almost like I was afraid to say it because it seems almost like too deep. But when you realize actually how hard that is in the day-to-day life, to say, I'm going to give preference to you. I am going to lay down my life for you. I'm going to listen to potentially what might initially appear like a boring laundromat story. But actually, as we get deeper into it, in your sharing of it, I see I see a world filled with mundane things that are endowed with meaning and sacred value in those mundane things. I mean, that
Yeah.
instantly makes me think of the episode of Seinfeld where George is at the laundromat and he's looking at it. He's looking at the thing going around and he says out loud something like, "This has to be the most boring moment of my life." You know? It and like that was the thing about Seinfeld was the show about nothing, and it was a way of highlighting how much of your life wasn't filled with transcendent experiences, but instead of making you cry at that, you laughed at it.
Yep.
And that's kind of at the nature of nihilistic comedy. But to say you're doing something in reverse, which is to say, yes, this was possibly the most boring moment of my life, but God is here with us in this as well. Um, that seems incredibly powerful insight that could only be derived in an other-centered, posture of the heart. So that seems, if I hear you right, I mean, that seems to be at the very core of it. If you took that out, nothing else would work.
Right.
And if you have that, everything from talking about Vervaeke terms to talking about the laundromat works.
That's right. That's right. And it is cruciform to listen because most of us have chattering monkeys that are like, this is me. And to listen means I'm going to put myself over here and I'm going to listen. And if you go to the group enough, you'll discover that, well, people have different religious and political ideas than you do. But if you've
Mhm.
actually created a platform of friendship where you care about the person more than you
Mhm.
care about who they're voting for
Mhm.
or where they're worshiping or any of these things, you can actually weave together some
Yeah.
understanding of each other and some love for each other. And again, we've had a difficult job selling this to churches in that number one, it's kind of hard to imagine, well, where's the value of this? And the truth is that for many people in churches, like even in my own church, um, many of the people in my church that are already in a Bible study already have a real felt sense of community.
Totally.
And,
Hmm.
so for them, the Estuary group, uh, I've
Yep.
got one space in my week for my small group and I have my Bible study there. And it's like, God bless you. I have no problem with that. But it's, it takes, churches will often be like, well, where's the clear presentation of the gospel in the group? And I'll say, well, that could happen in a group, but it's certainly not in the protocol. It's not programmed into the group at all. And while, I was just talking to one of
Well,
well, I
or is
agree it
it?
happens, but no,
No. But
I
I'm even saying,
agree,
okay,
but you
no,
you know
no,
what
I'm
I'm
not even.
talking about here.
Yeah, but I would say it is like the point I'm getting at is it is programmed into the heart of the protocol,
Yes.
right? Like it is not at the propositional level where, here's the four spiritual laws and, if you sign off on these particular affirmations, then you have identity belonging with this group. But it is the gospel in the sense of the imitation of Christ
That's right.
in the midst of people together, right? And I know I'm not saying that, well, there's your new easy pitch that you can bring to churches, but just to affirm that that seems like the only way this thing is working is whether people would acknowledge it by name. There is a reverence for that mode of engagement at the very core,
Yes.
right? That would be the way I see it at another level of participation in Christ. I mean, Dialogos is, if we were to actually import our John 1 understanding of who the Logos is, our ability to even say anything reasonable at all or say anything truthful or beautiful at all is because we have in some sense like we're tuning a guitar or tuning a violin to a reference note. And in that community discussion, what's happening is a tuning to the reference note that's at the core of reality. It's the music of the spheres.
Yeah.
There's your sales pitch to churches now, but
I don't
but I
think
just
it's
want to
gonna
affirm, like
work,
I
but
see it there. I
no,
mean,
that you're
I
exactly
see
right.
it there.
and so lately I've been more pitching it in terms of pastoral care. And the same of what you
Mm.
just described is true of pastoral care.
Yeah.
Many
Yeah.
pastors like me have relationships outside the church. And I've been at this church a number of years, and so I have a number of years worth of relationships of people outside the church. These people do not go to my church. They may never go to my church, but I sit
Mhm.
and I listen to them and I help them in certain ways, and they help me in certain ways. And and right there in the middle of that pastoral relationship is the same gospel. It is the
Mhm.
same
Absolutely.
cruciform extending of ourselves for the welfare of the other. And
Mhm.
there are no strings attached. I don't go to these people and say, I've been coming to your house now for the last 27 years and you've never joined my church and I've got hundreds of hours of sitting and listening to you complain about your spouse or your neighbor or your parents or whatnot. So here's the bill. You
Yep. Cut your tithe check.
know? So and I see and I try to tell churches that, and I was going to say, even though, so one of our sister churches in one of the distant suburbs here has been working Estuary 2 for a while, and just last Friday, the one of the pastors told me, he said, "Yeah, you know, we've got some new baptisms from our Estuary group because people started in the Estuary
Beautiful.
group, and in time, they were like, they began to say, well, these are the kind of people I want to be like, so." And in a Jordan Hall way, in order to be like these people, I'm going to embrace their confessions. I'm going to embrace their baptism and I'm going to become a part of this community. And so that does
Hmm.
happen. But I think I think the Estuary group, as with the TLC, are all outgrowths of, I think, past a pastoral vision of engagement with the world.
Hmm.
And I think the world is deeply hungering for that now. But it's not something that's very quickly or easily scaled. I was thinking about this morning when I was hearing on Christian Baxter's channel. He had a group of Zoomers and millennials talking about Midwestuary,
Christian is
and
great, by the way. Can I
well,
just
oh
take a
yeah,
moment
isn't
to
he?
celebrate Christian? I love Christian and he's doing great. Every time I see him do something, I'm like, keep it up, Christian.
Yeah, he is. He is. So he was hosting this conversation, and many have noted that, I mean, whether it's the TLC or Estuary, it all sort of grew out of these randos conversations I did in the very early days of Jordan Peterson. And I mean, I just did what I do because I'm a pastor. It was just
Hmm.
normal for me. I watched my father do it. He watched his father do it. So there's a tradition there. And I didn't think a lot of it. It's just what I did. And and then I thought, well, maybe I need to do way more randos conversations. But then I thought, well, continuing to do randos conversations is fine. But the key is that the people that have sort of picked up on this, they need to be doing it around them because the truth is, if I do 1,000 randos conversations a year, it doesn't go anywhere because I can't follow up on that size groups. And churches have known this forever, which is why
Hmm.
they deploy
Yeah.
small group ministries, which is you
Hmm.
need all these little groups. Estuaries need title pools,
Hmm.
and where things get down to the personal level within their Dunbar number, because you can't be best friends with 1,000 people. You're limited by time and space. And so, basically what's happened in the TLC and also in Estuary to a degree because they're not sort of the same thing at all. Estuary has, there's a lot of people who go to Estuary who it's so much fun walking into an Estuary group and a bunch of people look at me like, who's this guy? Because the other people are like, oh, Paul Vanderklay's here. They're like, who the heck is Paul Vanderklay? No idea. That's awesome because it means
Yeah.
that the network of relationships is continuing to extend person by
Hmm.
person, that all of that knitting is going on. And I don't know about it. I don't see it. I can't keep track of it, but that's what needs to happen.
Hmm. Can I ask you? I know we probably need to wrap up here shortly, but I do have one lingering question, just as a kind of like a story arc over the last 7 years for you and your engagement with people, seeing as probably the beginning of at least collecting extra eyeballs via YouTube happened around conversations around Peterson. And of course, Peterson has had kind of various ebbs and flows in being accepted or popular, or it seems like more recently that there's maybe a stronger, even anti-Peterson backlash, which has kind of always been there in other segments of the population, people that, but it seems like those who were even once really strong in like the IDW spheres. So I'm curious, like your experience in those different waves, if you have felt that you know, has it revealed to you the level in which like Peterson or Peterson ideas have been at the center set, and then in kind of like, times where there's been, if we can picture this like a stock market of Peterson, where
Yeah.
there's been more of a decline, and yet the groups have remained, that it maybe discloses, oh, this isn't. I guess what I'm asking is how much has it ever entered your mind? Boy, if I never talked about Peterson early on, would what would we be talking about?
Yeah.
And if he moves on, I know he's having some health issues. If
Yeah.
he never enters back into the zeitgeist, what becomes of this movement and group?
A few things. First thing is that a number of people have noted that kind of what happened around me really got going when Peterson disappeared. And so a
Mm,
part of that was sort of a vacuum because I kept talking about him. But part of it
hmm.
was that there was sort of a displacement. And I knew when I saw Jordan, when I saw what was happening around Jordan, I knew that there was going to be a vacuum in the pastoral personal space. That a lot of people, I mean, to me, it was analogous to a Billy Graham event.
Very much.
People come to
Hmm.
town and like, wow.
Very much.
And
Yeah.
Billy Graham was wise enough to have a whole network of local churches ready to
Hmm.
try to enfold those people, whether it was
Yeah.
successful or not, but at least there was a shot at that. And I knew that where are people who listen to Jordan and something, he does this exorcism on them, where are they going to go? What are they going to do?
Absolutely.
Okay, you cleaned your room. But anybody who does works with people on a church basis knows that it's not just I accepted the gospel today and now I am happy all the day. What a crap. You need a group of people
Hmm.
around you to support you and share life with and all that's the whole business for the church. So at the same time, those that for Peterson from sort of 2017 to 2018 that was a really amazing moment culturally because
Yeah.
I saw people who now are, way on the left loving Peterson and people on the right loving Peterson. There was a moment there where Peterson hit a note and there was a lot. And ever since then, it's been fractionating. And that's normal.
Hmm.
But so and I think while certainly a bunch of Peterson ideas helped a lot of people, again, I think he did it sort of an exorcism and a certain spirit was sort of
Hmm.
dispelled by Peterson, but then other spirits come along and enter that house. Um, I think it was also for a lot of us, we saw that YouTube could do something. Something could be done on YouTube that many of us didn't see could be done. And so Peterson opened a door that, Peugeot, Vervaeke, myself, others have
Hmm.
sort of walked through. And so right now, even though there's bunches of people who are sort of soured on Peterson on the right and the left, there is among many people a sense of gratitude towards him
Hmm.
that they might disagree with him, they might not like all the decisions he's made, but there's a sense of gratitude that he opened something up. And to go back to your Campbell business about the patricide, he Peterson was the one who said you have to rescue your father from the underworld. You've killed your father, now go bring him back. Because if you did, because you
Mhm.
need him. You need to honor your father that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God gives you. You need to honor your parents. And so, yeah. And so Peterson, and, will this be the end? Who knows what's going on medically in terms of Jordan's health and whether, I mean, he almost died last time. There's a sense of, especially this time after everything they've been through, there's sort of a sense of isolation that
Mhm.
none of us really know what his health situation is and whether he'll recover or anything like that. I don't know. But
Mhm.
Peterson's
Mhm.
had a remarkable track record of lightning continues to strike him multiple times. So will there be another wave? I don't know. But he did break something open that allowed this to happen. But I also saw right away in 2017 when I started reading Reddit threads and comment threads around Jordan, some he's cleaning out a house. If you don't if you don't lead people into a better spirit,
Hmm.
this could go all kinds of different ways. And so I think, especially Jonathan Peugeot and I very quickly go to church. I mean, because
Mhm.
that start there. And for all of the
Yes.
shortcomings that we all know churches have, at least there's a shot at something here. And many of those people have gone to church and have been blessed for it, even though
Mhm.
it's complicated. But what in this life isn't complicated?
Yeah. Yeah. I hope he doesn't mind me sharing this. I don't think he will, but I think of Garth who might be watching, and Garth was, part of the Discord server, and Garth started showing up at my church. And even though it was quite a drive for him, he got plugged in. It had nothing to do with me. He got plugged in just to the already built-in networks of, community groups and things like that. Um, Ended up getting married, found a wife, got married, is just such a valuable part of our community. And that's really that is a huge success story.
Yep.
And for him, it was this little corner, and it was, Peterson as a transitional bridge out of some other stuff. And so I wonder if the thing gets, even as you were just talking about this, I think the thing that stood out to me is maybe the thing that has kind of helped set the story for the estuary groups, for conversations and Discord servers, from everything from that to the affordances for you and a guy like John Vervaeke, who come from very different spaces right now, to have deep, from my vantage point, it seems like a very meaningful friendship beyond just dialogue partners. And I feel that to a lesser sense as well with John and others. But the thing that kind of governed the conversational core that I do think, as I'm reflecting, I'm appreciative to Peterson for pointing out, or at least challenging. I think what he ended up doing was challenging that postmodern anti-story narrative that at the heart of civilization is conflict and power.
Yep.
And instead, what he keeps pointing back to, and I think this might be the bare minimum shared commitment, kind of getting at like what would be the bare minimum shared story people would have to be able to have some sort of navigable ethical framework to work on projects together, would be, do you see other-centered love at the core or not? Is voluntary self-sacrifice at the core? And I think if you have that, from my reading, you again, I acknowledge where I'm coming from. I'm, doing all the self-aware cringe thing. I'm acknowledging where I come from in this, that you are naming the cross at the center of it, even if you're not saying it's the cross. And so I do think what we've seen, because the reason why I'm asking this, Paul, is I am actually really optimistic about the cultural shift over the next few years. I know a lot of people are negative and pessimistic, but I see what happens when you mention things like the desire for the wholesome, the desire to actually sit and listen to people who have wisdom. And this is the thing pulling people out of a meaning crisis. You're capturing so many stories, and I'm seeing these all over anecdotes. And I think the data is now starting to catch up in some interesting ways about Gen Z church attendance. Some of this is happening with Justin Brierly and Glenn Scrivener reporting from the UK. I'm optimistic, but the thing I'm interested in is like this next chapter. So if we move past culture war stuff, and now we're like, oh, okay, there's a moment here for post cynical disposition to be aspirational for the pursuit of the wholesome. What will be the shared story that allows for us to collectively participate in a massive project of cultural renewal?
Yeah.
What would allow us to work together in institutions? Because it's going to
Yeah.
take institutions
Yeah.
to do that. And I think it might be, I think I think the thing that Peterson pointed to, which I'm appreciative of and changed the dialogue about, was pointing to, even though he wasn't sure exactly what to do with the man on the cross, that he pointed to that as being, I don't think we can build around any other story
Yeah.
than that.
Yeah.
And so I think I see that from my vantage point and these interesting dialogues that are happening is some shared commitment to that, even among people that might not name it using my same vocabulary.
Yeah.
And I'm I'm optimistic that maybe there could be going forward a real movement of like cultural renewal
Yeah.
that is birthed out of this. It's not tethered to personalities or people at the center. I know that feels idealistic, but if you're saying like well, maybe a conversation for our next time together is whether or not what happens in Estuary you think could scale. What happens in the relationships you've helped foster? Can that scale outward? What Jordan Hall experienced in that, tiny church, can that scale outward from a wholesome communion at the center, other
Yeah.
centered, because I see it even in my own city, Paul. Like Minneapolis has changed so much since I first moved here, and it's not for the good.
Yeah.
And it's becoming increasingly a low trust society,
Yeah.
and we don't have a shared story. The
Yeah.
fracturing is yeah, it's tragic. It really is tragic. I mean, I
Yeah.
grew up in Detroit and saw what happened when a Midwestern city hit decline. I'm not saying Minneapolis is there, but it's just a different place. And so you
Yeah.
start imagining, well, what would even recovery or transformation of this look like? And I go, I don't, I can't see it happening unless we can get to some minimum shared story. So I see
Yeah.
what you're doing as kind of like microcosms of what would have to scale for us
Yeah.
to get positive transformation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's good reason to be optimistic. There's always pessimism and optimism are they're
Hmm.
always present. There's reasons to be pessimistic and reasons to be optimistic. I I mean, we do these conferences in a sense to share estuary more broadly because it's a very slow program. It's not, a lot of some people are frustrated by that because it grows at the speed of people. It, it's word of mouth, and
Yeah.
it's a very slow program. It's a difficult program to sell in a sense. There's no money in it. Um, but it's
There's your first problem.
yeah, that's my first problem. If there was money in it, people would be selling estuary all over the place.
Yeah.
It's so easy to rip off. It's so simple. You can rip it off in a minute.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that's when you get to the question of this wholesomeness, I
Mhm.
think you're really getting into that, so the opposite of that sort of mercenary, instrumentalist,
Yeah.
um, um, economic motivation.
Utilitarian.
That's right. Where these people that are worshiping in the way they're doing it, they are they are just doing it because that is who they are and how they are. And they don't even know that it doesn't sell that well. But part of them doesn't really care. I mean that 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 video of that one guy just on that hillside just dancing, and then it sort of spreads to all the other people. Um, and so to me, I, Estuary and this whole project has always been something that, I don't really push in that if asked to talk about it, I'd gladly tell you how much I love it and how good it is. But my little group is still a little group, and we have, two or three little groups in Sacramento now, and there are little groups all around the world doing this. But and it has to do with exactly what you put your finger on, that cruciform center,
Mhm.
because we all know it's costly. Do I really want to go to that estuary group, or shall I just sit here and see what's on Netflix? And
Mhm.
it's that old saw about, devil works hard on Sunday morning, because do I really want to get up and go to church, or would I just rather run to Starbucks and drink a high calorie thing I feel better about because I used oat milk instead of cow's milk? Um, so but at the
And the
same
cost of being
time,
known, right? There's the
yes,
cost of potential lowered status as people get to know you. There's an adage about there's no normal people, only people you don't know well enough, you know.
it's true. Or
And
will that person that annoys you be there again? And because
yeah.
annoying people are always opportunities to grow your cruciform muscles. They always are. And so,
Hmm.
and that's what community, I mean, C.S. Lewis pointed this out years ago. The reason you go to church is not because the vicar has such a great sermon. For C.S. Lewis, you can't imagine how many sermons he listened to that's probably just kind of, and the
Mhm.
music is so awesome. No, the music is often not awesome. And the people are annoying and selfish and et cetera, et cetera. And so you might say, well, why would I want to go to a place like that? Part of the point is you don't want to go and you go anyway, which is the same for when your child has vomited in the middle of the night and you know that, okay, I've got to get the kid up, I've got to clean them all up, I've got to pull the sheets off, I hope I have another set of sheets that fits that bed. I've got to sit there and calm them down.
Mm.
And I mean, it's perfectly obvious why people don't want to be parents. I mean, it's
Mm.
hard work,
Absolutely.
but
Hmm.
now that, my wife and I look at our children who are all in their 20s and 30s now, and we're like, gosh, are we glad we had them? Gosh, are we glad we
Hmm.
invested in them? Man, are they
Hmm.
wonderful. And I know
Hmm.
perfectly well that's not the case for everyone. And I also know perfectly well that my wife and I have our own anxieties about our kids, about what about this and what about
Absolutely.
this? And are they going to be able to do this? And forever. So it's the same cruciform path. And I think you're right. Peterson did put his finger on it. The difficult thing that Peterson has never sort of seemed to get a handle on is, in fact, grace. That,
Mm.
yes, you want to pull that cross up that hill. Yes, you want to sit and listen to that annoying person. Yes, you want to listen rather than talk right now. But don't forget that even this capacity, which in the long run is can be deeply meaningful and enriching, this capacity has been given to you because someone else did it for you. And
Mm.
it's not just Jesus on the cross, it's also a parent or a teacher or a coach or a friend or even a government. Someone did it for you and you didn't even deserve it, but now you're the beneficiary of it. And so to be a
Mm.
part of that giving train, if you have a vision for it, it's a pretty glorious thing.
It is. It is. Well, Paul, I've enjoyed this.
Oh, me
I
too.
probably have to move on here now, but we should not have as large of gap in between now and the next one, although there is many
No,
good things to draw out of you in the space in between.
Well, I am poking at, there's a big TLC presence in Minneapolis, and I am continuing
Mm,
to encourage them to do a conference in Minneapolis at some point. So large or small, it can
mhm.
be 12 people, it can be 100 people, but
Yeah,
yeah.
I saw Luke say something about that. We can call it Skulltuary, you know, the Minnesota Vikings skull chant, you know, appropriate. Yeah, I've traded that, marked that one already, Luke, so don't try it. You'll owe me financial royalties.
Indeed, indeed. Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, thanks,
It's
Paul.
always great talking to you. Yeah, I'd love someday to be able to get up to Minneapolis and, you know,
That'd be great.
see more in real life things. So
Yeah,
I actually have other
yeah.
friends that are in that area too. So
Yeah, we should figure out a way to make that happen. I've some lingering idea, some ideas in the future of other points of when we think about how to bring people together in shared projects of cultural renewal. A lot of that is just you're doing it already, but it's kind of the magic of what happens when you get people in a room together. And I have so many different people that are kind of outside of this little corner that are maybe in my circle of friends across the country that I often go, oh man, I want to, if I got that person in the room with this person,
yeah,
oh, that would be magic, you know?
yeah, yeah,
So yeah, there's only so many hours in a day. Lots of good ideas
there
end up
are.
end up falling by the wayside. Hopefully, we'll figure out how to make that one a reality at some
Yeah,
point.
absolutely. Well, you be well,
All
Paul,
right,
and take
you too.
care.
You
And we
too.
will certainly see
Yep.
you on the Twitters
Yes, you will.
and on the YouTubes.
Yep, for sure. All right,
All
Paul.
right,
Take care.
all right, bye-bye.